this clinic, and I've sat in on a number of different sessions and worked mainly with government counterparts. So I thought it would be useful to sit in on the one about business in the private sector and observe what people were discussing on this. So happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Shannon. And I forgot to record, but I just started a recording, so just for your information.
And as you know, this is Johan from the UNICEF country office in Jordan. I'm with the child protection team here, and this is my first time in the VNR process. So I'm interested to understand a bit more how to contribute. And also, I guess the interest in this group, it's because we have some programs in child labor here, and we're trying to engage also with the private sector. So there is, I guess, the different angles for the interest. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. And is Jordan volunteering this year for the VNR?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
This year is the
Jordan
VNR.
So, yeah. Great. I think everybody got the chance to say hello and introduce himself herself, but yeah, no, I think everyone. Great. So just to help us start this discussion, I wanted to just share an additional very quick points, and I do not want to monopolize the conversation, but I thought it might be useful to just go a little bit more in depth following what I shared earlier. So I just wanted to say, when we see multi-stakeholder integration in the VNR, what we see is that the connection between business and children and youth is actually quite weak, and it is limited to a few SDGs. So primarily SDG 4 on quality education and SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. And they're both extremely important, touching on youth employment. And of course, with the COVID crisis, we know that this is a very critical area of work and very critical SDGs. But as my colleague said, Manel, I think in the first one, really all SDGs, the 17, are relevant for children. And it's very important to work with the private sector to see how we can identify the one where they have the most significant impact on children, and try to really invite them to look across the 17 SDGs. When we look at business opportunities, we can use this two-lens approach where we look at drivers of growth and when we look at limiters of growth. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a tendency from the private sector to really focus on the positive and to report the positive impact they have on the SDGs and on the SDGs impacting children. But it's also very important to look at the negative, in particular, the indirect negative impact. And for instance, there is an organization called the World Benchmarking Alliance that's done an amazing work in the last few years to try to rank companies according to the impact they have on different SDGs and across different systems. And recently they've done also great work looking at a baseline for social transformation. And they look at human rights, they look at decent work, and they look at ethical, responsible conduct. And here we see that if you do not comply with the minimum human rights requirements, it's actually very hard to be credible on the positive impact you have. So if you have a positive impact through the product and services that you deliver, including the ones for children, but you have issues of child labor across your supply chain, it's basically impossible to claim the positive impact, because it kind of, it creates such a imbalanced kind of SDG implementation kind of overview that it cancels even the positive impact you have. So drivers of growth is where we can see opportunities for innovation, for market growth, for differentiation, for cost saving, for brand building, and so on. And then limiters of growth is really about looking at which SDGs pinpoint to the risk to be managed, to be reduced, mitigated, or eliminated. I also wanted to just share a few stats from this interesting study that PwC did 3 years ago, now in 2019, where they explored over 1,000 company reports to find out how businesses are engaging with the SDGs. And here we see that 72% mentioned the SDGs in their reporting, 25% actually included the SDGs in their business strategy, 21% of the CEO or chair statements included a reference to the SDGs, and only 14 of the company mention specific SDG targets. So we see that really more effort should be done at going beyond kind of the SDG washing, as some like to call, but really going into the strategy, building this to the core of the business operation, and going beyond the 17 goals, but looking at the 169 targets. Just to start the discussion, those are a few questions I'd like to put forward, but feel free to also share your experience, your questions, and we can have a very open discussion. First one was, what is your experience engaging the private sector on the SDGs for children? What are, in your opinion, the incentives for companies to join multi-stakeholder platforms and other mechanisms to monitor, report, and follow up on the SDGs? What might be also specific to your country, to your context? And then the last one is, how can we encourage businesses to go beyond the 17 goals, to really identify the relevant targets and report transparently on both the negative and positive impact? Let me stop here, and yeah, anyone who'd like to speak, please just unmute yourself or raise your hand. Just sorry, I don't see the hand. Oh, Shannon, you have your hand up, please.
Yeah, thank you, Nazila, for that additional information. I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned during the pitches in plenary, which is the voluntary nature of disclosures and reporting. And it's the same for government. We're discussing the V in voluntary national review. But do you think that the trend in the medium to longer term will be for there to be more mandatory regulations and disclosures about what companies are doing on their social and environmental impact? And my second part of my question are that governments, I think, can use both the stick and the carrot approach to get companies to be more aligned with the SDGs. And just wondering if what you think are some of the incentives, for example, tax breaks if you meet certain thresholds, or better lending terms for debt, or things like that, that could incentivize companies to align more with the SDGs, and also what you think might be coming down the pipeline in terms of mandatory disclosures or policies that might affect companies. Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. I mean, on your first question, I definitely see a trend towards more regulation, more scrutiny from government, and we've seen that even now with the COVID crisis, that a lot of governments have used this opportunity to really bring some requirements to companies before supporting them financially. So we've seen that in France, for instance, but others have completely missed the boat. Like in the UK, they've completely missed the boat with, for instance, EasyJet. They've provided a package, but without any requirements on their carbon footprint and on the environment. So there is a trend. I think it will go towards more regulations, more requirements, but not only from government, also from investors. And I think this is a very interesting trend as well, is that we see investors actually putting requirements, looking at, for instance, the World Benchmarking Alliance that I was just mentioning earlier on the social transformation baseline. They actually work with investors, and a lot of investors are now asking for disclosure, for a lot of indication that that they're actually responding to not only their basic human rights requirements, but on ethical and responsible conduct, on fair wages, and so on. So from my experience and what I've seen, I think we're in the right direction. It's not going fast enough, but we've seen this trend. I don't know if colleagues in the group have also some experience from their national, from their country and national policies, if there's anything they'd like to share.
Nazila,
Yes.
this is Maya.
Yes, Maya.
I don't have a direct experience to share, because I think when it comes to engagement of public-private, private sector or businesses in Cameroon, for example, in my context, that is probably not there yet. So when we're looking at maybe countries that are first time going into the VNR, or really trying to find the entry points of how do we start that, and road to engagement, I guess is basically what I'm trying to say here, is really probably through industry association. So countries like maybe in Cameroon, you might have like the oil and gas sector, you have associations that are an entity of the government, but not yet, it makes up a representation of different companies. There's a public listed company, but it's privatized, but it's government owned. Then you have also associations like the cocoa industry, that they also probably play a role too. So maybe the advocacy here is trying to understand what types of industry association are active and if they are part of the VNR process. In my previous work in Trinidad and Tobago, there was that element of associations to be looked into, and not directly working with SME associations or SME companies or public listed companies. I think that may be more relevant, maybe in more OECD countries where there's an established public listed companies and ESGs are a requirement for their investors. But I think for us in countries like Central Africa and the West, it's really kind of a new thing, and it's trying to understand who are your actors and who are your influencers that can bring value add to the VNR process. Part of what, this is a personal passion of mine. I used to work in Malaysia, so we worked a lot with the oil palm industries in terms of looking at labor laws and putting in place internal operational and strategic policies to protect the oil palm companies, to ensure that they protect families who hire and not use children as part of the season to bring in more palm oil. I guess, what's the word? I forgot what it is, but to measure the inconsistent attendance of school children that are using them to actually help on the field. So, those are some things that like companies can do, and it's to regulate and to ensure that there's an internal policy that families who are on the field do not use children during the seasonal process of having children, because it's based on how much they source the oil, the plant, or whatever the fruit, to ensure that they get returns. So just to give that example. But what I would like to ask, and I guess the guidance here is in the VNR, because if this is the first time, what are maybe experiences from other countries in this group, or there is, how did you break that dialogue? Because a lot of actors don't necessarily see private, they still focus more on the government, and a lot of it is seeing in public-private, and they're not really looking at business sector as a key role player, because everything goes back to the regulations of the government. So I don't know if there's come examples, concrete examples of what's being done. Did anyone establish a relationship with association industries in their relevant countries? How did they go about selling it? How did they go about establishing the relationship? Because as actors of development actors, it's not always easy to have that conversation with businesses unless they have like a pure understanding of a value add of bringing their marketing and visibility, lifting that up as one of the incentive for them. So I'll stop there. I hope I didn't add to more confusion, but those are just some of my thoughts. Thank you. Over.
No, great. Thanks so much, Maya. I think this is very interesting and very relevant. I think your questions on how do we start this dialogue, and I think this is very much linked to the incentives, right? How there is a bit of this fear from the private sector regarding regulations and the trends that we see, but it's also about how do we make the case? How do we demonstrate this imperative for them, and that this kind of very government UN-led process is very much relevant for them and can really help them not only demonstrate the positive impact they might have on the SDGs and on children, but also help them align with government priority, align with national priorities, develop their license to operate, and ensure that they can stay competitive in the long run. So yeah, we'd love to hear from the other colleagues in the group if you have other experiences or examples from the work that you've done in your countries. Yes, Nadim, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. In Pakistan, since 2017, we are trying to engage private sector as a partner for implementing SDGs. And in our first VNR, we tried to, sorry.
No need to be sorry.
My son is sitting close to me. So in our first VNR, we try to engage private sector. Pakistan Business Council is one of the major stakeholder for the private sector and other stakeholder. But unfortunately, we didn't get the response from the private sector as we were expecting to have, and that is mainly. The Maya and the Shannon was pointing out the regulation and the fear and the trust deficit that the private sector always have in terms of their business activity. Then later on, we developed a document which is called the Responsible Business Framework, which is one step ahead of the CSR, the Corporate Social Responsibility. We try to engage businesses to become sustainable by their own. Not the government is taking steps to do that. You have to do this. You have to do this. Instead, the businesses has come up and said that okay, we will not pollute the environment. We will not contaminate the water stream passing nearby. We will comply the labor laws. We will not engage the child labor in our businesses. And for that, we try to make up a case of the responsible businesses for the major corporation. And so, but still, the reason I'm here because I want to give ample space for the private sector to be, because we know that the private sector in Pakistan is doing marvelous work, but they are in isolation. They are in some of the private sector, like the telecom industry. They are in their silos, working within the community or the various initiatives that we know that, but I don't know what are the factors that impede them to really connect with the government. So my question is to you and our August participants, that how the government can bridge this trust deficit from the private sector in order to have a meaningful engagement in the SDGs implementation and obviously for the VNR process as well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Nadim, for these insights and questions. I mean, I wish I could give you a magical recipe. I mean, and I'd love to hear colleagues' thoughts on that as well. I think it is really context specific. In the documents also that Shannon compiles with input from the different colleagues at UNICEF, I've also provided some of the good examples of VNRs in the past that highlighted some of these multi-stakeholder partnerships and platforms and mechanisms that they've put in place to really bring all of the stakeholders together as part of the consultation for the presentation of the VNR. And depending on the context, depending on the countries and some of the industries, we see different mechanisms being put in place. It takes time, it takes energy to really foster these relationships, also ensuring, as I was mentioning, to that we kind of balance the different, you know, strength and the different kind of power dynamic. When you build such a multi-stakeholder alliance, of course, there's going to be some stakeholders with more powers, with more influence than others. And this is, of course, very important when we talk about children and youth, and how do we make sure that they have a voice, but that their voice is heard, and that they're this is done in a transparent and fair manner. So the same goes when we look at the business sector and the private sector. It's not a homogeneous group. So you have SMEs, you have industries that have less influence, less power, and so for them it might also be difficult to enter these multi-stakeholder platforms and coalitions that are being put in place for the VNR. But I will share in the chat box the reference to this document where you can find some of these good practices and successful examples from previous VNRs. But also, if anyone in the group has any experience with that, please just feel free to speak.
Thank you.
Maybe I can just come in quickly.
Please, yes.
It's not directly related to your question, but it's maybe more about, incentives. So maybe disincentive when it comes to, trying to make businesses more, child rights advocates or child rights friendly. I mean, we have in Switzerland, we have the issue of many multinational companies that have, really enormous reach. And we have recently passed a new bill, which is meant to hold them more to account for their, respect of child's rights throughout their business, throughout their whole value chains. I mean, it didn't go as far as some would have wished, which was the idea was really to hold them to account also for their partners in partner countries under Swiss law. So this is not possible now. It would really have, I think it would have been quite a strong message and regulation. But now, the issue is how to sanction, how to monitor really the adherence to these standards, and whether there's any abuses or whether there's any violations of child rights. And I think this is, really the enforceability and also the monitoring. I think it's a huge issue which really requires really this voluntary contribution also by the private sector. And I think it a lot works with public image of these companies. So there's not much one can do with these multinational companies, which have such huge operations, to monitor all of these. So I think it's really to try and bring them on board to out of a consciousness of their public image and responsibility to really adhere more. I think the sanctions which we foresee, it's monetary sanctions. So I think this will only work to a certain extent. It has only been passed very recently, these bills. I don't think we'll be able to already share insights and results in our forthcoming VNR, but I certainly would hope that in the future this is something that we could maybe work on also as a contribution to SDGs by the private sector, and mostly on child sensitive issues. Thanks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That would be very interesting, Lilian. Thanks for mentioning that. And just I think Shannon's point, I think it's also a mix of stick and carrot, right? So there is, to take again, sorry, I keep mentioning it because I was very impressed by the launch they did last week on the social transformation baseline, the World Benchmarking Alliance. But they're using an approach where they're listing the companies and the ones that do not demonstrate respect for human rights and decent work. But they also give them the option to rectify and to respond. And so they have a bit of a two-stage approach where they first rank them without naming the companies that didn't get the chance to respond. So not immediately kind of naming and shaming and trying to impact on this kind of reputation and visibility of brands. And but then ultimately, once they've had the chance to respond and to find solutions and to address the issues that have been raised, then they will actually, publicly list them and mention these companies and where they stand on these critical factors. And so I think it always needs to be a bit of both. It needs to be an approach where we try to build a relationship, where we try these mechanisms outside of the public eye, but really trying to make the case and working together to address some of these issues. But then ultimately also this works when there is public scrutiny, when there is the eye on the business operation, on the issues of child labor and all the negative impact companies may have on children, that also of course impact their bottom line and therefore usually make them move and make them address and make them put the right mechanisms in place to mitigate and eliminate these risks. Anyone would like to, ask another question or add anything on what we already discussed?
I think the timing is good because the meeting rooms are closing in a minute.
Okay.
To Eric.
Shannon, may I ask you, I was looking for the trends document, the public version, to just put in the chat here.
The public version of the trends?
Yes, the public version of the, how is it called exactly? The one where we have the examples also. The one called an analysis of the government issued report and the SDG implementation and progress.
The analysis of the VNRs?
Yes.
I don't think we have a public
version
of
Sorry.
That. No, it's okay. I can ask Jennifer. We're going to be doing a summary of some of the key points. So publicly we will. The child poverty team does something just from the perspective of how child poverty is discussed in the VNR process.
Okay.
And I bet that theirs might be public. So I think if you Google that, there's a Child Poverty Alliance that works on this.
Okay. Because in that one, there were some examples of this, multi-stakeholder mechanisms where we can really include the private sector, and some that have done that quite successfully in the past. I just wanted to refer that to the colleague.
Absolutely. And if we're able to share it wider, we will do so.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. I see 30 seconds. Thanks everyone for joining this group.
Thank you for a very informative session. It's
great.
Good to listen to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, thank you. Welcome back. Emiliano, tienes que poner...
Ahora me sale la voz.
Oh, colleagues, welcome back to the plenary. We have some minutes left, and we have 2 or 3 things that we still need to do. So we're going to try to do it as quickly as possible. So I'm going to go to the groups and I'm going to give you room for a sentence that summarizes in 30 seconds, the main highlight of what you discussed. Remember, these will be recorded, so no need to give us a summary. Just a sentence of what you felt in the meeting. And then I'm going to give the floor quickly to 2 colleagues to close the meeting. So let me start quickly with Manel on child rights, 1 sentence summarizing the discussion. Manel.
So perhaps over to Hannah, if you'd like to do that. Hannah was the reporter.
I will try to be quickly. We spoke about data disaggregation and different data sources for data collection on children's rights, also specific mechanisms and legal frameworks specific on children's rights, children laws, or children's rights coordinators, also about holistic approach, and of course about including voices of children at first in all these systems.
Thank you, Hannah. Very succinct, very informative. That was a great summary. Test for the other groups. Let's go to Sola and Jennifer on public financing.
We had actually some very similar themes come out. There was some excellent points about the importance of collaboration, about working across agencies, the One UN approach, engaging with civil society as well as with government to identify evidence from multiple sources, and then where evidence doesn't exist, to use this as an opportunity to engage with government to emphasize the importance of being able to demonstrate their commitment, and then also how to use the narrative structure to display and demonstrate progress. And we also touched on the importance of child representation, and the case of Zambia, who used child representation also to demonstrate some of these issues.
Excellent summary. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Let's go to number 3, meaningful child and youth awareness, engagement and action. Kate.
Thank you. And thank you to my group for sharing their varied experiences working with young people. A lot of great experience of working with vulnerable groups of young people. So that was one of the themes of the discussion. We also spoke about working with certain decision makers at the community level, for example, who traditionally are not used to creating spaces for children and young people to participate, and how important that is. And one of the key, I think, themes that came out as well in our group is how, some of the challenges on working directly with children and young people, particularly when they come from very vulnerable and marginalized groups and have very critical needs when it comes to shelter and education and food and health, access to that as well. We didn't have, I think we only had one person in the group who had directly worked on a VNR before, but a lot of interest and a lot of experience that can be applied to working in the VNR process. So that's a summary from group 3.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's go to data, Mark.
Thank you, and thanks to the group for everything, and thanks to Abdul Razak for being rapporteur. Over to you, Abdul
Razak. Thank you so much. We have discussed some challenges related to the disaggregation of the data. The first question was, how can we address the discrepancies between the data produced by the government and the other institutions? There were some concerns of that, because when you compare some data produced by the government with the other data produced by the other institutions, you see there are some differences between the two data. So what the recommendation that comes stronger was to follow the rules of the official statistics data. The second question was, how can we capacitate the national human institutions that are working human rights in understanding the data collection processes for monitoring the child rights? So we discussed that it's important the national importance of the data and to follow up the data, so that we can make some progress on the rights of the children. The third question was about
to finish, Abdul Razak. Just wrap it up because we have to continue.
Yes. The other question was the usage of the big data as an innovative way. So it was mentioned that we can use the data or big data for some issues, but we want to, for example, like the poverty, but we need to triangulate the data with the other sources of the data.
Sorry, Abdul Razak, but I have to stop you right now because we have to continue. Thank you very much for that summary. Moa, a one-liner, please, on climate change and environmental degradation.
Yes, well, actually, Florence has volunteered to be our reporter.
Florence,
so
one-liner.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, actually, we did mention on our site the importance of the climate change policy update, a regular, constant update on the population based on these policies. We also did mention the importance of government to constantly work on bringing in the youth into all those policies that we're currently working on. Same as well, the importance of creating a special department that could follow up on these children's rights, and same as environmental changes. That's constantly most of the thing mentioned in
Thank you. No, very good summary, very quick and very to the point. Thank you so much. Nasila, business and children.
Thanks, and thanks to Naeem for the two sentences summarizing our discussion.
Thank you very much. The private sector is really challenging to engage private sector, and it depends on the context and so many things to really get a meaningful engagement, not only in the implementation of SDGs, but also in the process of the VNR and the child rights. So the discussion mainly revolves how to get the maximum from the private sector in order to get the really reflection in the VNR. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, you get a flavor of the groups. So we finished this with two quick statements for our session. First, I'm going to give the floor to colleagues of Madagascar for some headlines on their experience on the VNR. And then I'm going to give a word to Arelis Bellorini from World Vision to wrap it up at the end. So let's go to our colleagues from Madagascar. Some headlines.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Andres. My name is Erica. I'm the Chief of Social Policy at UNICEF Madagascar. We participated to the VNR process last year, and I would say two main headlines. First, mix can really make a big difference in the preparation of the VNR report. We completed mix just before the VNR, and we were able to inform 11 SDG goals with mixed data, and about 75% of the indicators the government of Madagascar is reporting on. And in addition to that, we also did a child poverty report endorsed by the government that the government then used to report on child poverty for the first time in the VNR report. Second headline is about the use of evidence. And in preparation for the VNR, we conducted a training with government officials to sensibilize them on the importance of using evidence in reporting through the VNR process about what works and what doesn't. And then we did for the first time an evaluation synthesis of all evaluations conducted in Madagascar in the years before. And we were able to inform through the result of those evaluations what works and what doesn't for 5 SDG goals. So this ended up being a separate report that informed also the VNR report in terms of which policies, which programs we should continue because they're having actually a positive impact on children and the population. So I just wanted to share those, and I will put the VNR report and also the evaluation synthesis in the chat. Thanks.
Excellent, Erica. Thank you for those final reflections. And to finish today's sessions, we have 2 minutes to listen to the reflections of Arelis Bellorini from World Vision. So Arelis, you have the floor for some final reflections.
Thank you so much, Andres, and hello, everyone. Just to briefly say that, as you can all see here, both UNICEF at all levels and civil society organizations that are present here, mostly child-focused organizations, are ready to support you in this significant major endeavor. We know that developing a VNR requires a whole process that possibly takes a full year of your government's involvement and engagement. From the World Vision side, we have developed a guidance note. It's a technical note that provides some guidance on how to mainstream children, particularly their rights and their needs, across the report based on the Secretary General's guidelines. We have seen, fortunately, an increased number of VNR that are including or that are basing their reports on the Secretary General's guidelines, which are voluntary. And this guidance that we have goes section by section, providing technical inputs on how you can reflect children and their rights in those sections. And we have those also in several languages. So we're ready to support you, and just reach out. We have offices across all the regions. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, Andres.
Okay, thank you for these wrap-up comments and offer. So colleagues, we're pretty much done. The only thing I ask you as you exit our VNR clinic is that you fill the survey so we can make the VNRs as better as possible. I understand that my colleague Jennifer will put a link with a survey in 4 languages. So you can pick the language of your choice, and you know, in Spanish or in French, whatever. And please, Russian, please fill it up and send us your comment. Meanwhile, I just want to thank you very much and thank colleagues in my team, Shannon, Annalisa, Jennifer, and the others for all the support, as well as Eric, who's been supporting technically with Geraldo, all of this happening. Please fill the survey and have a great day. We won't close the conference, so if you just want to stay on and fill the survey, that would be much appreciated. Have a great rest of the day wherever you are.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. Just wanted to say, colleagues, the survey takes less than 3 minutes for questions. So we will welcome your responses. It will allow us to improve and give you next year the resources that you need.